And joining us now to discuss this is David Blackmon, energy policy analyst and advisor and senior contributor to Forbes, and Mike Leon, director of strategy and the Free and Equal Election Foundation and the host of the Can We Please Talk podcast. Good afternoon to you both. David, starting with you, is there overregulation, do you think, as a result of the endangerment finding rule?
Well, the endangerment finding has basically provided the foundation for essentially all of the regulatory actions at EPA and some of the other federal agencies during both the 8-year Obama administration and the 4-year Biden administration. So it is really that ruling freed EPA up to regulate carbon dioxide as a pollutant, which is an interesting concept that has been disputed by many. And so I mean, if EPA is successful in rolling that endangerment finding back, then it raises the potential for rolling back the entire Obama and Biden agenda.
So, Mike, what do you think? There's definitely have been regulation as a result of this rule, the endangerment finding. But is there overregulation?
Well, first off, good afternoon to everybody. I think obviously there's truth in what was just said there about that this is just a proposal, right? But if goes through after the public forum and whatever happens, and there's going to be legal challenges to this as well, but whatever ends up happening, if this does go through and there is a rollback, I mean, this is something that's monumental. I can't sugarcoat it, Don, because again, as was just mentioned, this is 8 years and 4 years of the Biden, 8 years of the Obama policy, and what this was found in 2009. It's going to be interesting to see what ends up happening with the legal challenges around this, Don, is one area that I'm kind of paying attention to, because remember, there was a monumental West Virginia versus EPA case that the Supreme Court already ruled on that kind of, undercut a little bit of what the EPA can regulate on. So that it's going to be interesting to see what happens with all this. But I think this is part of President Trump's, agenda. Let's be honest, he campaigned on cutting a lot of, trimming the fat in his words of what agencies are responsible for at the federal level. We've seen already cuts to USAID. We're seeing now potentially this. We've seen cuts to the State Department and other departments. They feel like agencies have gotten too big and we have to cut. And this is part of it. So elections have consequences to people out there. If you're wondering how this is going to affect you next time, vote somebody in office that's going to have your interest in mind and thinks that climate change is a factor, and that the Environmental Protection Agency should remain in place and should be somebody that's overseeing a lot of the protections of the environment.
So, David, building off of what Mike said, can I get your comments on this issue in the context of deregulation versus climate policy?
Well, as Mike said, there's a general feeling in the Trump administration, led by his key appointees, Doug Burgum, Chris Wright, Lee Zeldin, that there has been an overregulation of the economy, and it's cost the economy billions of dollars every year. President Trump talks about it all the time. And so it's, but you have it at the same time, the concerns over environmental protection. And so there's a real balancing act to be done here. The election, as Mike mentioned, we just had an election on all this. It was a central aspect of the Trump campaign, and voters said, yeah, well, maybe it has been overregulated, and we're going to put some people in office who are going to reverse some of that. This is a monumental thing. I agree with Mike. This would be monumental because it basically would remove the foundation for regulating, a lot of regulations of carbon dioxide emissions out of power plants, automobiles, and other emitting sources like dry cleaners and other businesses like that. But at the same time, it would not remove regulations over actual pollutants, particulate matter out of coal-fired power plants, emissions of methane emissions out of automobile tailpipes, things like that. So it's big where carbon dioxide is concerned and other greenhouse gases, but it's not really big over pollutants as we defined them before that endangerment finding. And of course, the Supreme Court decision in Massachusetts v. EPA in 2007 that set up the basis for that finding.
So, Mike, to what David said, I'll ask you this, and you can respond however you wish. Zeldin cited concerns saying that greenhouse gas emission standards themselves are what posing threats to livelihoods, not carbon dioxide. What are your thoughts on that? Have we reached a point, for example, in regulation that makes it hard to maintain a healthy economy?
Yeah, well, first off, David's the expert on here. I mean, that's as clear as day, right, Don? But here's what I will echo, because one of my colleagues on the podcast network, we recently had Lisa Garcia on. Lisa was a EPA regional administrator. And one of the things that Lisa mentioned in the episode that we recently did was talking about what EPA's role was as an agency, how they started, and how they're really a public health agency for all intent and purpose, right? Yes, they started in terms of clean water and clean and energy and air, but they've morphed into something bigger, which is really around public health and advocacy for that public health. So look, I mean, there's a striking balance, Don, to your question of how do we not restrict, consumer choice with respect to what kind of cars we want to drive and things like that. But then also how we realize that the planet is getting hotter by 2 degrees every year, and how we're having irregular weather patterns, which are a byproduct of climate change. How 64% of people surveyed recently by Pew have said that they are affecting climate change themselves and the people in their community. And those numbers vary, obviously, between people that vote Democrat or Republican. So we have to figure out how we help the planet and how we listen to climate scientists and experts on this matter, while also not restricting freedom of choice, but also understanding that the almighty dollar doesn't matter if the planet is getting hotter and we're going to suffer from that. And not only we on this panel, Don, but our kids and our kids' kids are going to suffer from that. So I'm interested to see what happens with respect to the public forum. I've happened to meet Lee Zeldin a couple different times. I mentioned this earlier today on a couple different other networks, and I have spoken to him prior to him getting, this role as EPA administrator. I had spoken to him before, and I will say he is rational and level-headed and does listen to the advice of people that work for him. And again, this is just me knowing him, through a couple different months of having spoken to him. But that doesn't mean that he won't follow the president's agenda. And the president's agenda has always been cutting agencies that were too bloated, were too big. And a lot of the times what you get, Don, as I've mentioned to you and other agency cuts, as I've spoken to other people across other agencies, is when you cut these things, when you eliminate these said redundancies that you think are happening, people are going to be affected by this, not just losing jobs, but people's lives are at stake with respect to all this. And so I'm interested to see what happens with the public forum. Again, I highly stress that this is just a proposal, but like David said, if this goes into effect and whatever happens with the legal challenges, this is going to be monumental for sure.
Okay, David, this one's for you. Do you think this proposal strikes the proper balance between regulation and free markets, or perhaps does it go too far in one direction?
It's hard to know right now. It's so early in the stage, and as Mike mentions, there's going to be litigation over this. And so it's really difficult to kind of foresee what the impacts are going to be right now at this time. The argument the administration is making is simply that EPA, under the Clean Air Act, simply doesn't have any real authority to regulate what, is essentially plant food. It's a naturally occurring substance. It's clearly not an actual real pollutant. And the Clean Air Act was passed. The law authorizes EPA to regulate pollutants. And even one of the authors, John Dingell, said that in 2010. He clearly said that the endangerment finding was an overreach. It was not the intent of Congress to do this. And so that's the legal argument that's going to be at hand in this litigation that will follow. And, we'll just have to see where it goes.
Okay, I think we can wrap up this conversation. But Mike, any final thoughts?
Well, final thoughts, and I stressed this morning, and I think these are examples that people can take with them. Voters are very short attention span. But if you want to take some examples of how things affect you, whether it be at the state, local, and federal level, this is why politics matter. So to the 91 million people who didn't participate in the voting process back in 2024, pay attention. This is something that's coming up on your radar. This is the planet. We all live on Earth. Temperatures are getting hotter. Climate change is real. And there's an administration currently in charge that wants to roll back some of those things because they feel that it's restricting the economy and the growth of the economy in certain sectors and certain markets. So next time, pay attention. And in 2026, let your voice be heard at the ballot box.
Well, all right, let's leave it there. Thank you very much to you both, Mike, David.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.